Yum, yum!
Greg here from Pixel Fondue. So I'm going to look at a number of kits in this video. We've got the Cockpit kit from Reuven Miller, which is a great heads-up display kit. We've got it's super customizable, so I'm going to go through that first and some of the customizations you can do. He's got another kit called Script Search, which is also really neat, which allows you to quickly search through multiple script folders to find the script you want. If you have a lot of scripts, like the Hatchet collection from William Vaughan, something like that, it's very useful. Also lets you record macros on screen, and it's a nice little utility. We've got a few updates to the Polly kit from Steve Hill. I'll show that here as well. And then Frederick has some really interesting updates coming to the DEX kit, which I'll preview at the end of the video, as well as a new particle mod he's created. So a lot of stuff. Let's just start off with Cockpit. Cockpit is a heads-up display. It's sort of a super configurable heads-up display. So I've actually dragged it to my shelf here. If you just, bring the kit in, it shows up in the kits over here like this. But if you really want to get to it, you throw it on your, I call it a shelf. It's a Maya term. Your workbench here. And you can just pop open this little button here and turn it on. And you'll see this is the default configuration. It's meant to be customized, so this is not how you work. You don't try to work with this thing in the middle covering up everything. But let me just go through this really quickly. So you've got a number of boxes here with a number of bits of information. We've got sort of a main box here with the name of the item and the mode you're on and some channels and other stuff, which I'll go through. You have two sort of customized boxes here. Right now they're set to materials, but I'll show you all the different customizations you can have. You've got a components box, which is similar to what you have down here. And this is useful to me because I like to use a gradient backdrop. I like to work in this blue backdrop in the advanced viewport. I think it's a much more pleasant experience than years of just dull gray. And this allows me to see things a lot better at a glance. These are actually a little hard to see, and I can't change the colors of any of these little heads-up items here in default MODO. We've got some other things like world position. You can see I've moved my torus over here, and I can have world position of any item in a heads-up display. I can see that this has quads, triangles, or n-gons in the item mode here. And yeah, so let's customize this real quick, and it'll show you how to actually use it in practice. So if you hold down Alt, you get the alternate settings of the buttons. You can click that and get the cockpit settings. I usually just drag this off. And you'll see there's some presets here, so I can, he's got some different, color options. And this may be more useful if you like to work in, say, default mode or something that's a lot more readable. Like I said, I like to work in advanced mode. And so I'm going to customize all my colors and opacities very specifically to the background I like to work in. And then you can just save it as a preset. So for instance, I can change the text color here if I want to change it to like something like, this color. You can see it's not showing up in this background very well, but you can see you can change the text color. Then you can just go in here and create a new preset, right? So it comes with some presets, but I've got my preset here, which I think works well in the advanced viewport with the colors and opacities. You can see you could change like the background opacity of that box if you want to, all kinds of controls for it, right? And you can offset these wherever you want. You can sort of give it a general position, like in the bottom left or top right, and then you can offset it, using these little controls here, these little pixel offsets. It'd be great if you could just drag the box and have it snap around, but I'm not sure MODO allows that functionality. The nice thing is you really only do this once, right? When you first set it up, you set it up how you want it. I want my stuff on the right. Some people might want it on the bottom or the top. I like it over there, and I like this sort of color combination. So let's take a look at some of the things that you can see in here. Like I said, you can see the world position, but there's just some basic stuff up here. I'll see the name of the item I have selected. If I have more than one item selected, I'll see it here. It says 2 items there. If I want to select some channels, like I have some position channels here, it'll tell me I've got 3 channels selected. See texture, it'll tell you if you have a UV map selected by default. So I pop up on mini props, you can see that texture is selected. If I go to none, that goes away, right? So that's really useful. It's actually very useful because certain commands like the PBR loader in MODO, if you want to load up a bunch of textures, if you don't have a UV map selected on your object, it's going to default to triplanar or box projection. And so, which results in you having to change the locator. So it's often nice to know at a glance if you have a UV map selected. And it has a couple other nice utilities. For instance, I can go to like edge mode, double click an edge loop, and I can see the length of that edge loop right here, or just like a single edge, right here. That's actually super useful if you're doing procedural modeling and you're doing like select by edge length or something like that. Very useful. What else do we have? Oh, it does some nice material stuff right up here as well. Here you can see where it says wait, wait, wait. That's just waiting for you to change mode. So if I go to item mode, it's going to give me my quads, triangles, n-gons. So if I do something like this and triple it, you know, I go to item mode, I can just see at a glance if I select an item if it has triangles or n-gons or not, or how many quads it has. Let me just delete that guy. So waiting is just waiting for input from a certain mode, right? So this is waiting for me to select some edges before it gives me the edge length. And it'll also show me like the currently selected material. So I can go in here and do a loop and just make a red material here, right? So let's just make this red like this. Whoops, turn this down, reflectivity down a little bit. So we've got red selected. And if I select a polygon, it'll tell me what material that polygon belongs to, right? So I do another loop here and call this green. We'll call this, do green, like so. And I select that polygon, I can see that it has a green material tag attached to it. So again, that's fairly useful if you have a model, especially if you have a model with a lot of materials that maybe they're hidden in the shader tree, or that if you import an FBX and they don't actually have any colors assigned yet, I can see that polygon has a green material tag on it, even though it's not showing up as green in the viewport. So that that's pretty useful. You can also see the materials over here on the side, like how many materials this item has. And here I've got this one set to VMAP, so I see we have a texture VMAP there. I can also go in here, or I just use mini props and add like a morph VMAP. So let's call that morph there. So I've got a texture and a morph VMAP on this guy. And you'll also see this purple line around here, and it says morph selected. This is super useful. So if you remember, if you go into like item mode, when you're rigging, you've got this yellow line, right? And it helps you remind you that you're in item mode, which is a very important thing to know if you're doing rigging. Not item mode, setup mode. You want to be in setup mode when you're rigging. So you have a yellow line because changes you make in setup mode will are important to your rigging, and you have to know that you're in setup mode, right? So we have sort of a yellow warning line, you're in setup mode. But we don't have anything like that for morphs, and oftentimes we'll be over here and we'll work on a morph, right, like this or whatever, and then we'll just sort of move on. We forget that we have this morph selected, and we start doing some modeling. Maybe we start adding edge loops and doing stuff like that, and we forget that we're working on a morph. And then when we leave the morph, all those modeling changes are gone. And so having that that outline is really useful. And that's actually in settings. You can actually go to settings, and you can turn this on or off. If you don't like it, you can turn it off. And you can also change the color for the morph indicator. So that's a really nice thing, in my opinion, the morph indicator. And let's talk a little bit about these two custom guys here. Oh, actually, let's talk about the components as well. So let's go through my components, right? So I can select some polygons. It'll tell me how many polygons I have selected. It'll tell me a total number of polygons in this item here. It'll also tell me the total number of polygons in the visible items in the scene. So if I do something like turn on this sci-fi wall down here, you'll notice that the scene polygons went up a lot, right? So that's a useful thing to know. What I also really like about this, one of the reasons it's a little bit better than down here, is I can go into like vert mode, select those guys, go into edge mode, select these guys, and go into poly mode and select these guys. MODO allows you to keep multiple selections active in different modes, right? And you can see those all right here. Where down here, I'm only going to see whatever mode I'm in, vertices or edges or polygons. And sometimes you forget, for instance, that you may have polygons selected while you're working in vertex mode, or edges selected while you're working in poly mode, that kind of thing. So that's actually kind of nice and useful as well. Let's talk about, let me turn this guy back on. Well, let's turn this guy back on, actually. So let's talk about these two guys over here, because we can actually change a number of things. First of all, let's look at materials again. So I've got my materials down here. So I start adding materials to this item. Let me just add a few materials here like I did earlier, and we'll just call those green, and we'll call these guys here red, or whatever I already had active before. We'll just go with red. So oftentimes you'll have an item that has materials on it, and here we've got red and green materials. but I can change this one into materials, sort of unused materials, or materials that are assigned to the object but aren't in the shader tree. And so if I come over here to my settings, I can pop open this little button right here and tear off my cockpit horizontal. What this basically just does is gives me just a nice way to turn cockpit on and off without having to go through the buttons here if I want to keep this active, and also to change these to custom boxes. So instead of VMAPs, let's do unused materials. And so if I go to unused materials, if I go over here to the shader tree, and I go to red and I delete it from the shader tree. And oftentimes you'll see this with objects you've imported in FBX or something. I've got an item and I think it just has that green material on it because it's in the shader tree. What I don't realize is that there's actually red material tags active on this item. They just don't have a corresponding group or mask in the shader tree. And here I can see that there's a default, all the ones that aren't masked, right, or right there, there's no default material in the shader tree tag. And there's no red one. So again, like this is useful when you're sort of deconstructing objects, you're looking at FBXs that you download off something like Sketchfab and import. It's just a nice, useful thing to have. And like I said, you can have it set to VMAPs. You can have it set to polygon selection sets. So let me show another material here, or another object. This is a CAD file, right? This is a step file that was downloaded off Sketchfab and imported into MODO. Couple of things here. We can turn this one into siblings, which means if I select an item, it'll show the siblings. I'm just going to press F in the item list here to find it, and it'll show, expand this folder and show all the siblings. And so it shows all the siblings of the selected item. That could be useful for rigging. I can also just, when you're in a sibling tree, you can just left, right on the arrows to go up and down the sibling tree, which is pretty nice to select things. I can also look at over here, from siblings, we can change it to user channels. So again, for rigging, you may have a lot of user channels on an item, right? Maybe a locator with a lot of user channels to control different deformations, things like that. So again, this is sort of a rigging debugger or rigging heads-up display, looking at siblings, looking at user channels. I can change this to parts over here. You see all these polygon parts. This often happens with CAD files, right? You come in, it comes with a bunch of part selection sets and also polygon selection sets. So I can also say turn this smaller one to materials right here. It's got the white smoke material. Or I can change this one to polygon selection sets. And so this doesn't have any polygon selection sets, but if I bring up something that came in from SolidWorks versus like let me just turn on my shading up here. This is a SolidWorks file that was imported, downloaded from Sketchfab and imported. They always have selection sets on them, polygon selection sets. You can see a bunch of them here, and they will correspond to the ones over here, right? And these are actually really useful for selecting and shading and stuff like that. So yeah, you can see any sort of combination here of edge selection sets, vertice selection sets, shading groups. You have SMG as shading groups. And then you've got, I think that about covers, yeah, VMAPs and materials. I tend to set these to VMAPs and materials. That's most useful to me. But, some people are going to, depending on what you do, whether you're rigging or working with CAD data or just modeling, it's really going to change what you have over here. You can also just, again, turn these on and off. So I can come over here and just go to my settings. If I don't want these custom boxes, I could just turn them off and just, work like this, right? So lots of settings, lots of customization. I don't see what really stops Reuven from adding almost anything in these stats or info list. If you can add edge length, I don't see why you couldn't add anything from polygons like non-planar or n-gons or whatever, sub-D polygon types or curves, anything like that. It seems like anything like that could be added. If I had any wish list for that, I suppose it would be to just, be able to add your own stats or VMAPs or any sort of data to these lists. Just pick what you want. It gets that information from MODO. And then, of course, be able to drag these around manually. My guess is that there's something in the SDK that's preventing him from doing that. But even without that, it's super useful. And like I said, especially if you like to work like I do in just sort of a nicer, friendlier environment. I just kind of got tired of working like this all the time, and so I prefer to have some color in my work. And then like I said, you can customize this stuff. So pretty cool. Let's take a look at his other one, which is Script Search. So let me just hide the mouse. I'll turn back on my torus. Actually, let's take my torus off, and let me just bring on like a cube or something like that. Subdivide this a couple times. Right, so Script Search is this little button right here, and again, you can put it on a workbench if you want to. I'm just going to tear it off from my kit bench for now. Let's take a look at this. So this does a number of things. The interface is a little, it's best to watch his video on how to use it, but essentially you can, if you have favorites clicked and you click here to do a search, it's just going to search through your favorites folder. Okay, it comes with some, so he put some in there that he had created. But you can add your own scripts to the favorites folder, and it just sort of filters it down to just your favorites. What's interesting about this is you can actually assign this pop-up to a key, like a hotkey, and just press the hotkey, and this list will pop up anywhere. So if you do you fire a lot of scripts while you model, right? Then you just put the ones that you like, scripts or macros, in that list, and you can just hit your hotkey, have them pop up, and grab that list. It's not too different than having like a pie menu or something like that with your favorite scripts on it, but it's a searchable list, which is obviously useful for something with more than 8 or 10 or whatever entries into it. You can also turn off favorites, and you can just keep this guy right here checked. And with that checked, what's going to happen is when I type, here's all my scripts. We've got a lot of pushing points, hatchet scripts in here and other things. Let me just actually select a bunch of edges here. And so I click here and I start typing like quick. So I want this is like off the recordable area. But I've got a little list of all Williams quick scripts that start with the word quick, and I can select like quick tubes like that. And it's going to activate the script, and it's going to just give me my options here, and I can say create tubes, and there we go. We got some quick tubes there, right? So, we can quickly search scripts here. With this checked, it's going to fire it as soon as you click it. With this unchecked, and I pick something, it's going to throw it up here in this box, which means you can copy it, and you can paste it in the command down here, or you can assign it to a key, or you can put it in a form and a button, whatever. It's just a nice way to get to the command. It also has a macro recorder, so I can go on here and say I want to start macro recording. So hit record. Let's just do some like bevel operations here, convert it to edges and bevel the edges down like that. Drop my tool, drop my selection, stop recording. Then I can just select another polygon like right here and play my macro. There we go, right? So that's pretty cool. You can also save it if you want to. You can give it a name. And so it's a nice little macro recorder. I think sometimes people forget that macros exist in MODO because it's kind of, you either have to fire it up from somewhere down here, up here in the record macro. I think it's somewhere up here in the, right there. In the system drop down, there's also, you can get to sort of a little macro recorder down here, I believe. But people sort of forget that exists sometimes, I think. So this is a nice little way to record macros. You can also save macros. You can also put them in your favorites. You can also put commands in your just basic commands, like activate polygon bevel tool. Put those in your favorites as well. So when you have your favorites checked, all those commands, all those scripts, all those macros are just going to be right here. So it's a nice little launching tool, utility. And if you use a lot of scripts, it's definitely worth looking into. So let me switch gears and go over to the updates to the Polly kit. So these are some free new mesh ops in the Polly kit if you already bought it. If you haven't bought it yet, is there more reasons to get it? So I can now do a spherize, a cubize, and a cylinderize, I guess you would call it. So let's just add a spherize here. Make spherical. There we go. Super easy. I could change the radius if I want. Bigger or smaller. I can animate these. I can change the weight. So I can turn down to 0.25 or go back up to 1. I can also make a cylinder. So make cylinder. All right. I can change the axis. If I want to, I can change the weight just a little bit to get rid of those little edges there. Pretty cool. So obviously your mesh, some meshes are going to be more usable. Some of these like have a lot of points, roughly spherical shape. You can make it spherize. There's also a cubize, which is interesting. So well, just let me go back to this for a second. So these will also work with fall offs and selections. So I can just go to the tool pipe here and I add like a linear fall off, and I can animate that. So you can imagine doing something like this, right? And so the more like divisions you have, let's change everything to 12, a little bit better it's going to look. There we go. So super useful. I've actually done a lot of like, you know, globe type animations over the years where you're changing the Earth from a cube to a sphere and that kind of thing. And you can also do like a cubize. So let's get make a cubic here. That's not what we want, obviously, but like I said, I can tie in a selection. So let's do a select by fall off right here, and then do maybe a capsule fall off for the actual fall off, like this. And there, let me just turn on ghosting here and turn my capsule to Y, and then I'm going to invert it, and then I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger, like so, like this. So now when I actually go to make cubic, it's just getting those edges there, and I can go over here to radius and make that a little bit bigger, like this, or I can adjust the weight, that kind of thing. So there's a lot you can do with this, right? I can actually, you know, whatever. Even this can, you can add another fall off to attenuate the effect, or move this fall off around. Turn off ghosting here, like this. There's a lot you can do with these. Let me show a more practical example. Let's show the soccer ball I made a couple weeks ago. In this, I used a surface constraint, and I used it on this sort of background perfect sphere here I had. So I used this background sphere and used a surface constraint to make the ball spherical once I got to that point in the mesh op list here. So I turn off that surface constraint here. You can see it's more like a sort of a roller mine from Half-Life 2 or something. But instead of even using surface constraint, I can use the make spherical, right? And this is going to actually let me do things like that surface constraint can't do, like just easily change the radius. Or I can just animate the weight as well. So I can sort of get sort of partway in between, maybe like a 0.85 where it retains some of that sort of, you know, faceted geometry like that. You can also do some cool stuff. Let me just make cylindrical here. Drag this down, turn it to Y. Maybe make the radius a little bit bigger. Like this, you know, kind of like, it's kind of cool, right? And I can go in and add like a fall off. Just do a linear fall off this time, and we'll put the fall off on Y, and so I can, you know, animate the fall off. I want to turn this from a sphere to sort of a cylinder, or I can just have the bottom part of cylinder and the top part still spherical. So now I've got like this sort of dome shape. There's just a lot you can do with it, right? So they're really useful, super awesome. He takes requests sometimes. So these are some things I requested after making this tutorial. I just think I requested the spherical, but he threw in cylindrical and cubic as well. And it's a free update, so go with those. Go over and get Polly, get Selma while you're there. Those two are essential. The other one's Harry, and I think Polly, or no, Harry and I can't remember the other one, but they're really cool. But they're a little more for advanced users. If you just are getting into mesh ops, the Polly kit and the Selma kit, I think, are essential. All right, lastly, I just want to do a quick sneak peek at some of the stuff Frederick has been working on for the DEX kit. So this first one, we've got a curve in the viewport here, and he has been working on curve packing. So here's I'll just show you my prototype real quick. That's going to be packed along the curve. And so let me hide that. Let's set the curve packing on, and there you go. Check it out. So you've got minimum and maximum size, just like you do with typical DEX packing. Make those a little small like that. You can also, there's different packing algorithms here. We could do like a absolute packing like this, and we can go in and do things like change, you know, the distance between the packing if you're getting it really close, or even the precision. So I can go up here and say up the, lower the precision or up the precision, right? And so it's really good. And I can put a little gap between there, or make these guys a little bit bigger maybe, like so. He also has a bunch of stuff for orientation, so you can orient these along different tangents or mesh normal alignments. You can do things like twisting, so I can do a 90-degree twist. You can see how you can use something like this for a chain link. You can also animate them. So he's got different offset modes, fractional and speed, and you can have different end behaviors like loop or just call at the end. So I can just sort of sample offset here. You can see me offsetting these. So you can do things like tank treads. He's got a little sample scene here. We've got some tank treads going. You can see how this would be really useful, right? And yeah, there's just a whole bunch of different options for this. Here's another sample scene he's got. I can go back into my curve distribution. These are also animated, by the way. And I can just change this from absolute packing to like random packing to get different sizes on there. So really interesting stuff he's got working on over there. And I think it'll be out in a month or so, I believe. But yeah, so let me just do a couple more. Let's see, we've got some random packing as well. Let me turn the twisting off and maybe up the chaos value so you can see. Let me just go like this. And so lots of stuff there with the curve packing. And he's also got a particle modifier he's been working on. So let me just pop this open. In fact, we'll go to a default view. This is just a radial emitter. So just playing the radial emitter, you see the little tiny particles coming out. But if I pop open the schematic here, you can see I've got something called a feature processor. This is a particle mod that he's been working on that allows me to visualize different particle attributes in the viewport. So if I turn on like draw mode and say point color, I can change my point color, right? So I can even just hold control and drag in the viewport here. I can change the point size, make them bigger, more easily readable. I can go in and turn on something like, bigger than that, draw ID mode, so I can look at them by ID, right? Super useful. Starting to look a little bit like Maya now, by index. I can turn that off. I can turn on draw orientation. None of these particles are spinning, so they all have the same orientation. We've got little axes there now. I can look at velocity gradient like this. So white ones are moving really slow. Purple ones, I'm sorry, white one's moving really fast. Pink one's moving really slow. Yeah, lots of stuff in here. You can even use it with meshes. So if I go over here, let me just stop this, pop open my schematic again. And instead of this particle simulation, I've got this mesh, this torus right here. Not a torus, it's a sphere, I guess, hooked up to a particle modifier. And I can plug that into my feature processor. And there again, I can see the points. So I can just select my feature processor here, maybe make my point size larger. You can see the purple ones there. Again, I can look at my index number if I want to. I can turn on my size, so you can see the size of the particles, the little green circles there. So I could do stuff like grab my shape and go over here to vertex maps, and let me just delete this one. I can add a new size map, right? I already had one on there. And then just select some vertices, activate the weight tool with Shift-W, and click and drag. You can really visualize your particle sizes now without having to hook it up to a prototype, right? Which is also really useful. And like I said, if you like to work in something like this sort of viewport, like I like to work in, you can just go in and change the colors, right? So if I want my size to be a little more viewable, maybe I make it more sort of purple, whoops, and make the visibility, full opacity like that. And maybe make my index colors black, like that. Yeah, all kinds of stuff. Point colors, I can change those to something like red and make them bigger. So there's a lot you can do with this in terms of customization. And it's just, something he's been working on. It's just getting started. I suspect there'll be more features added to it. But it's nice to see some particle mods actually being, developed for MODO again. And I hope this is, part of a whole new system he'd be working on.
Yum, yum!